Please tell me you're seeing this too. Hey guys, what's up? And today I'm gonna do a review on Mr. Robot Season 2. Okay? Okay. So let me recap Season 1 before we start. And in case if you haven't watched Season 1, you shouldn't watch this video. Because we're gonna talk about a lot of spoilers from Season 1 without giving a spoiler alert. So, in last season, which is the first season, Elliot is working at Allsafe, a company, and Elliot was also a part-time hacker who hacks people's social media, especially Facebook. And Elliot was one of those antisocial, clinically depressed junkie who is also a schizophrenic, who hears lots of voices, who sees a lot of visions, who hallucinates a lot, and sees his dead father, who apparently is real to him until the realization on the episode White Rose. There's this group of hacker called F Society, which invited Elliot to join, but actually Elliot was actually the one who created F Society, the hacker group, and the group has Darlene. It has Darlene, who was his sister, and it has Moby, and then the antagonists are first of all E-Corp. E-Corp is basically a huge financial company who secretly controls people's pockets, and F Society just wants to destroy the entire company, and that is a very risky plan. And also, there's another hacker group from China called the Dark Army, and the leader of the hacker group is White Rose, who was a transgender person, so far the Dark Army and F Society seemed to be working really well, but I have a feeling that the Dark Army and F Society gonna have conflicts. We're gonna cause some conflicts very soon in the future. So anyway, let's get into the season, shall we? So honestly, the first episode is Unmasked, Part 1. And honestly, this is actually the first Mr. Robot episode I've ever watched. I watched it in Seattle, USA, while on vacation. Right now, I'm living in Hong Kong, a city in China. Learn your geography. Well, anyway, I live in Hong Kong, and last year, summer holiday, I went to the USA to have a vacation. And Mr. Robot Season 2 Episode 1 is actually the first Mr. Robot episode I've ever watched. So I was pretty confused, and I forgot almost half of it. So I rewatched it after I finished Season 1 after the vacation, and now it makes much more sense. So the last season's finale left us with a lot of questions. What happened? Where is Tyrell Wellick? Who did Elliot open his door for? And this season's teaser is epic. Oh my gosh, it's one of the best opening teasers for an episode I've ever seen. I just like how minimalistic the title sequence is. Again, like last season, the title sequence is basically Mr. Robot. The word, the text, the logo just pop up on the screen, very straightforward in one piece, and I really love it. And I also really love, okay, this is a two-part premiere episode, so it literally pops up in the screen, Part A, and I really love it. I really love it. So the first shot is basically an F Society mask, which is really straightforward and cool looking, and then the mask was taken off. It's Tyrell Wellick. Oh my gosh. And then we see Elliot executing the program, so we kind of relive the 9/5 incident a little bit. And then we get a little recap as this I Monster song plays in the background, which is really cool. Really amazing musical choice, first of all, and I also really love the camera shots, the angles, the style, the lighting itself. So, we are recapping what we didn't get to see before on season 1, which is basically Elliot's childhood. And it's pretty cool. It's like a small reveal, although we know it's happened, but it's still pretty cool to see. So, yeah, since it is the new season, let's give the viewers a clue, says the producers and the writers. Then it continues to rewind to the past, showing very blurry, unclear clips of Elliot falling out of a window and then in the hospital, and then very quickly we assumably will feel kind of like fed up of Elliot's childhood, and we will be like, please just show us something in the present day. Tell us what happened in the present day. So the writers are really smart. Right after the hospital scene, so his mom was opening the sliding door as the camera was closing in. And that was really cool. The effect was really cool. And then the Mr. Robot, the title sequence popped up, and yeah! Oh my gosh. The intro is nearly perfect. Well, anyway, the second half of the episode is basically Elliot introducing us to his new lifestyle, and still refusing to tell us what actually happened in between the finale and this episode, and what happened before the 3 days. What the heck? Well, anyway, this time Elliot is trying to get rid of Mr. Robot, or aka his imaginary dead father. Although Mr. Robot is still messing with him and doing all sorts of trickery and trying to trick him and all that, but Elliot still had the upper hand. Control is not an illusion, he said, and that's pretty exciting. Part B, it's a bit more entertaining. It's a little bit more entertaining. Scott Knowles is one of the people in E-Corp, and the F Society, which is taken over by Darlene, called out Scott Knowles to burn huge amounts of money. I forgot the amount. And Joanna Wellick had a new boyfriend, and Joanna was, telling him how to, torture her. And Angela still had her self-esteem problems, which I think is pretty cool. The show is going into many different directions. And Gideon Goddard, the person who was formerly the boss of Allsafe, was facing the FBI. The FBI was starting to suspect Gideon of doing something weird. And I just love how the show clearly separated the life of Elliot then and everyone else's lives. Elliot was in this nice, peaceful, very dreamy, moody kind of place, while everyone else were still in this dark, surrealistic, intense New York life. And at the end, the story could end in two ways. This season can be really promising, but can also be somewhat boring to some people. Moving on to episode 2, Colonel Panic. It's a really crazy episode. Everyone's crazy, everything's crazy. So Elliot continues his new way of lifestyle, his trying to get rid of Mr. Robot at the same time. So a new character is introduced. Not really a new character, it's introduced last episode. It's Leo, and it's played by Joey Badass. So it's really cool. So Leo gave him the Adderall, and he was like, sure, this Adderall is totally gonna help me get rid of Mr. Robot. Meanwhile, a new character was also introduced. Her name is Dominic DePiero, Dom, who was in the FBI and was investigating on people who's related to F Society. And the E-Corp boss, Philip Price, invited Angela to a dinner. Just in case you don't know, Angela works for E-Corp now, and it's Evil Corp also. So Philip Price started to invite Angela to dinners and started to treat her like she's a gem to him, and started trusting her and giving her all these sensitive information that Angela wouldn't really handle. But what the hell when Elliot first takes Adderall? He went insane and he puked it back out. He had this hallucination where he was kidnapped and people was pouring concrete into his mouth, and it was actually just a vision. And he puked, he vomited all these Adderall back out, and then he was like, I will not be owned. And he grabbed those pills from the vomit and he ate it back. And oh my gosh. And everyone in this episode did bad things, you know. And there's even a scene where someone jerked off in bed. It wasn't too graphical, but I'm just trying to address it here. Last episode, some main characters died, but on this episode, someone also mysteriously died. I'm not going to tell you who. So there's this suspenseful bit of plot. And the sequence where Elliot takes the Adderall was so amazing. It was so underrated. A lot of people overlooked it. I really, really loved the sequence, the montage. The directors of Mr.Robot really know how to creatively use a frame. There's all these crazy shots, including Elliot being super excited, and suddenly he starts to glitch out, and the frame starts to be glitchy and more pixelized, and then Elliot watches this washing machine spin, and then this washing machine was inside Elliot's pupils, and that was really creative. Wow. And Elliot had been a lot. There's also a couple of Breaking Bad references on this episode, like Hank investigating Walter White, Hank trying to investigate Heisenberg, and now we have Dom trying to track down F Society. Then it's episode 4, Init 1. This episode, Elliot was still trying to fight Mr. Robot, except what's different between last episode and this one is, on this episode, Elliot was more rational, more mature, and looked at the situation in different perspectives. Elliot was more peaceful, more calm, and collected on this episode. Again, I really enjoy this episode. Last episode was intense and whack and crazy, but this episode is more like a subliminal, subtle realization that maybe it's time for Elliot to accept the presence of Mr. Robot. The teaser of this episode is brilliant too. The music in the background really builds up the tension and the atmosphere, and the sequence where Elliot dreams was fantastic. The whole dream sequence, the monologue, everything was really sweet, really fine. I really, really love it. Finally, I see something positive and happy in the show. And I also want to add that towards the end of the dream sequence, there's the scene where Elliot and a bunch of main characters of Mr. Robot sit together and had a meal. And we were like listening to Elliot narrating, and Elliot said, "You'd be there too." And I feel like that's really touching, and finally there's something positive and happy in this show. Still, so many bad things also happened on this episode, not necessarily for Elliot, but for other characters. USA Network, the next HBO, probably. Well, anyway, the drama heats up on episode 5, Logic Bomb. It's the paths of FBI, F Society, and the Dark Army intersecting with each other. So, this episode isn't necessarily an Elliot episode, it's more other people. So the FBI went to Beijing and cooperated with the Chinese government, the National Security of China government, and they both wanted to take down the Dark Army and F Society. While F Society was about to hack the FBI, which was a crazy idea, but Angela was involved also, so what could possibly go wrong? Meanwhile, Elliot found out something really bad about his friend and got himself in deep trouble. I'm gonna be vague because I don't want to spoil everything. Anyway, there's a big storyline concerning the FBI and the hackers, and a small plot line concerning Elliot. I really like the scene where Dom entered a room and there were like 20 clocks around the room ticking at the same time, and then the minister of the security for the Chinese government is actually White Rose. I think it's kind of crazy, but I think it's the same person. And then White Rose and Angela was like talking to each other, and I mean Dom and White Rose and Dom was like talking to each other, and Dom had no idea who White Rose actually was. And the last two scenes of the episode is brilliant. It's mind-blowing. The second last scene was really, really surprising. It was shot in one long take. I really love it. And the last scene was shocking, and it's crazy. It just came so suddenly, and I was like, oh shit, what's happening? Moving on to episode 9, Master Slave. It's the best episode of the season so far. I really enjoyed this episode. I get why some people don't like this episode, because it's totally off the charts. It's totally mind-bending and twisting to a point where it starts to get messed up. And, I mean, not in a brutal way, but in a really unexpectedly funny way. Well, anyway, some people don't like this episode, but I loved this episode. I adore this episode. This episode, oh boy, the first scenes, the first half is so great, and the last scene is also amazing. So, since this episode is that great, I have to give a spoiler alert. So, I'm gonna talk about the last scene first. The last scene is basically Angela helping F Society to hack into FBI inside the E-Corp building, and it's taken in a long take. It's shot in a long take, a 6 minute, 7 minute, maybe even over 10 minutes. I forgot to count, but it's a brilliant long take. It's intense, it's smart, it's artistic. I love it. And the only thing that kind of bothers me is the Chinese on this episode. I'm not that good on Mandarin Chinese, but they tried. That's what matters. Well, anyway, I'm gonna talk about the first half. Oh, I love it so much. First of all, the scene where Angela meets Darlene's boyfriend, which is not in the first half, by the way. The scene where Angela meets Darlene's boyfriend, Cisco, is really cool, because Cisco was the same person who hacked Angela and spied on her, and then Angela was suddenly working with the same guy, and it's really cool. It's really satisfying to see these two people who aren't supposed to meet. And most importantly, the first half, the sitcom. My gosh, I was watching it and I was like, am I watching Mr. Robot? Is it an error or something? It isn't. It really is Mr. Robot, but it's a sitcom version. This 90s Fuller House parody sitcom. This episode started with a low resolution and a 90s aspect ratio. And I just love it. I really do. It's really unexpected. It's really fun. It's also kind of mocking, like, it's mocking the society in a fun way, and I really love it. This is the sitcom where the Alderson family went to a road trip, and Elliot was in it, and he's so confused. He was the only person who was woke in there, and everyone else was inside the sitcom, and Elliot was so confused. Like it's kind of the fourth wall break that doesn't break the fourth wall of the show, but this is the show, and inside the show was a small compartment, and they broke the fourth wall inside this small compartment, and that's really complicated in a really brilliant way. I love it. And the sitcom takes up a total of 18 minutes, which was incredibly entertaining and touching when we realized Mr. Robot isn't much of an antagonist anymore. Mr. Robot was actually helping Elliot. And the scene Elliot hugged Mr. Robot and cried, it was emotional, and I love it. I would do the same if I were Elliot. I also want to add that in the beginning of the sitcom, there's this title sequence where it actually showed real actor and actresses' names. So people, including me, first thought that yeah, this whole title sequence thing is a part of this whole satire sitcom. But no, this title sequence is actually the alternative version of the title sequence of the show Mr. Robot, created for this episode, for this satire sitcom, and I think that's really brilliant. It really used real actor names, and it's full of references to the show, but it's also really confusing and entertaining. Then the story progresses on to episode 7, Handshake. Handshake. So, on this episode, we learn about a lot of things we don't know before, and we also asked a lot of new questions. So Elliot helped Ray. Ray was a character that showed up a couple episodes ago, and Ray was a good guy. Yeah. And Ray kind of just gave in on this episode. Then there were some people who didn't like Elliot because of what he had done, but Leon also played a big role on this episode. And then there was Angela trying to have more and more power in the E-Corp, trying to be getting more and more ambitious. And then the Dark Army is closing in. So this episode is really suspenseful in a way. Mr. Robot also revealed a little bit of what happened in the 9/5 incident, which is really intriguing. The script. Yes, the tone of the episode overall is not as dramatic or as intense as I thought it is, but it had some game-changing and entertaining plot. Oh, and I also want to add that towards the end of the episode, I think Joey Badass, aka Leon, actually saved Elliot during a fight in the prison. And he stabbed someone in the ass, so I'm just gonna make a joke here. Joey Badass is Joey Stab Ass in this episode. And that's kind of gross, but it's also kind of cool. And the ending, wow. I don't know how did they come up with a twist like that. It's a really weird plot twist, but it played out really well. It really surprised me. I didn't see that coming, so Handshake, great episode. Next is Successor. And the entire episode does not feature one bit of Elliot. Elliot was gone in this episode. In fact, I think this is the first episode where Elliot doesn't star in it. Not at all. There's also a bit of Angela and a lot of F Society. This is an F Society episode that featured Darlene as the most recurring character. After what happened last episode, I really want to know what it's like for Elliot now in the story then. But we didn't get to see him on this episode. And so I guess I'll expect more of him on the next episode. Well, anyway, this is one of the most paranoia inducing and suspenseful episodes I've ever watched. It's the kind of story that makes you go paranoid for some random reason, which is something very unsettling and uncomfortable, something doesn't feel right kind of way, especially for Mobley and Trenton. Since the FBI and the Dark Army is like against F Society now, kinda, and Mobley, Trenton, and Darlene was freaking out. They were so paranoid. They were destroying phones, they were leaving no trails, they were changing names, and it was an intense, suspenseful episode. And weird things started to happen, and I was actually kind of scared. This is straight up cyber thriller, and that's how I call it. And it ends literally with a bang. It's a good episode, although I want to see more of Elliot's new life. I really love this suspenseful episode. Moving on to episode 9, In at 5. This is where things get even more trippy and destroyed it. First, we see the missing gap between the last season and this season, which is really satisfying to watch. Then we continue to some really suspenseful, paranoid, and dark storytelling. Now we realize that everyone in the show are also both in danger and dangerous. Literally every single character is in danger, and they are also dangerous in some way, shape, or form. Including White Rose, Elliot, Tyrell Wellick, Philip, Angela, Cisco, Darlene, Dom, Mr.Robot, everyone. White Rose is the leader of the Dark Army, really dangerous, but Philip threatened him. But Philip doesn't know White Rose is White Rose, but Philip threatened him, and White Rose was kind of bothered by it. And Angela successfully fulfilled her ambitions in F Society and forced Philip to promote her. But the FBI was probably secretly against Angela, and it's not good. And Darlene just did something crazy to FBI. But Cisco was secretly not really on Darlene's side and was kind of skeptical and having second thoughts. And he was also really afraid of the Dark Army and White Rose. And then White Rose also worked with Elliot somehow and tricked the FBI. So everyone was kind of fighting against each other and working with each other secretly, and that's really cool. And Elliot also worked with Tyrell Wellick, which the FBI wanted to catch, but Tyrell's wife, Joanna, secretly hated Elliot. And Mr.Robot is Elliot's friend now, but somehow he replaced Elliot occasionally, which was really weird and disorienting and confusing, which again, I really love. Like, he replaced him when he was working with Tyrell. This whole thing is already an extremely complicated puzzle. It's like a game of who will die first and who will win. Everyone on this episode was taking risks, doing crazy things, and it's either they succeed gloriously or putting themselves in more trouble and probably end up dead. And more cliffhangers that I really enjoy, and I look forward to them. And the ending was also great, and it gives you just the right amount of time to make you surprised and savor it at the same time. Over to episode 10, Hidden Process. And fun fact, this episode is released on my 13th birthday. My 14th birthday. Last time, all the storylines emerged into many different big problems, making different characters meeting each other, and the suspense is real. So now we got Dom going after almost everyone in F Society except Elliot. Joanna Wellick was trying to get Elliot to find Tyrell, and Angela was trying to fight back E-Corp. One of the scenes is Elliot asking us, the audience, a question, and asked us if we can help him find out something. That's really smart because it feels like a video game. And Elliot was interacting with us, and it's really realistic. The second half of the episode is really dramatic. It's a climax, but it's not that climactic, but it's a really slow and satisfying climax. Wow, but the last scene really blew my mind. How they executed it, how they filmed it, it's brilliant. In such an intense moment, the camera didn't even move a single inch. We only have a close look on Dom and how she went farther away from the camera and reaching her destination. And then we can barely see what's happening over there, and we could guess it. I don't want to be vague, so I'm throwing in a spoiler alert. So, in case you haven't watched it, okay, you must have watched it. I gave you a spoiler alert. Well, anyway, it was the camera was across the street, and Cisco and Darlene was in this restaurant. And then Dom found them, and Dom was chasing after them into the restaurant. And Darlene and Cisco didn't know that yet. And then suddenly, like, Dom went in, and the camera was still there, watching Dom walk away from the camera and enter the restaurant. And we were just there, helpless, trying to see what's gonna happen. And all of a sudden, this motorcycle just went into the frame, and it was from the Dark Army. And they were holding like machine guns, and they shot the entire restaurant down, and there was chaos, and we were still there. The camera was still there, and we were helpless. We were destined to not help this, and all of a sudden it just felt so unrelatable. We were totally in Elliot's shoes, but we were not in anyone's shoes on this episode. We were just a spectator. We were helpless. So I really love how the director and how the writers executed this scene. I really love it. Moving on to the two-part finale of the season, Python. I have to give a spoiler alert. Boop! Last time, Angela was about to confess an attempt to take down E-Corp, but suddenly, all of a sudden, after talking to Elliot, she was kidnapped and was taken to somewhere else. And then, yeah, that was really confusing. And then Joanna called Elliot to look for Tyrell, and Elliot started to suspect Mr. Robot of doing something weird. Distrust and suspense started to build between Elliot and Mr. Robot's relationship. And Dom survived another shootout. Wow, lucky. I think this episode is not about the drama and the suspense, but it's really weird and surrealistic and surprising. And I enjoy the hell out of it. Elliot was trying to sleep, and he wanted to observe Mr. Robot of doing something weird. So he kept saying, mind awake, body asleep. Mind awake, body asleep. And then suddenly, he went out of his own body and started to switch roles between Elliot and Mr. Robot. So Mr. Robot was usually the person who watches Elliot, and now Elliot was watching Mr. Robot, and Mr. Robot doesn't know it. Yeah, they two are the same person. But then they're not. Let me guess. I'm just gonna take a wild guess that one of the voices that said mind awake, body asleep was actually Sam Esmail's voice, the creator of the show. It's a great opportunity for voice cameos, just saying. Well, anyway, the Angela scenes are really weird and interesting. Last season, Angela felt like a bit of a boring character, but this time, Angela was entertaining. It keeps us questioning how will the things go and what's happening without giving any context. These kind of confusing scenes are really enjoyable, and that's one of the reasons why I love the show. At last, it's episode 12, Python, part 2, which is another really satisfying yet mind-boggling ending to a season. If you've watched it, great. If not, another spoiler alert. So basically, Dom was trying to get Darlene talking the whole time, holding her captive in this FBI interrogation room. Meanwhile, Elliot was with Tyrell and was checking on what's happening. The subplot line is basically something new, which is Joanna taking revenge on Scott Knowles, which isn't that interesting comparing to the Elliot meeting Tyrell again plotline, but it's okay. It's still okay. The scene is so shocking and impressive when Dom shows Darlene all the things that she came up with, all the things she figured out with. And Darlene realized that FBI came really, really close to F Society. And Dom also showed Darlene's all the Mr. Robot characters connected somehow with all these lines, nailed and connected all accurately with this slow, moody, confusing, traumatized, shocking, but in the least dramatic possible way song. That kind of music also played at the end after the end credits, which I really love. Really mind-bending. Like last season, it has a post-credit scene, and the post-credit scene, like last season, it's another really moody and peaceful long take where surprises happened, but in the most anticlimactic way. in the most artistic way, which is really peaceful, really spiritual, but you shouldn't feel that way. You shouldn't. But the writers are just forcing you to feel that way, but you shouldn't feel that way. So your mind is really conflicted while watching that scene. This time, Leon meets Mobley and Trenton, and I'm really looking forward to what's going to happen to them. And even more surprising when we realize that we actually really underestimated Angela all along, and Angela was actually working with Tyrell Willick all along. And this reveal was, again, really peaceful, really quiet. Tyrell just called Angela, and Angela was like, yep, like in the most normal way ever. And we were like, wow. And the scene where Tyrell shot Elliot was also really mind-bending. Is it real? Is Tyrell really real? Is this bullet real? Yeah, I think it's real. I'm on the ground now. I can feel the pain. I think it's real. Or maybe it's not real. I don't know. The confrontation of reality versus imagination returned again. And it's like a cliffhanger, unlike any other cliffhangers in all the TV shows ever. It's such a confusing and entertaining in a very surrealistic way kind of cliffhanger, and I really like it. It's such an experience. This season is another really well-produced, shocking, but yet keeping the drama inside traumatized, making you question, and a new chapter in Mr. Robot. It's like the drama was boiling hot in a pot, but there was the cover, and you were standing on top of the cover. So it was kind of like here and there, the drama's going here and going there, and you're like, oh, it's about to burst. It was really suspenseful in a confusing way. At the end, Mr. Robot Season 2 is actually even more enjoyable than Season 1 in my opinion. Season 1 was all fuzzy and confusing and kind of irregular, but this season is way more suspenseful, dystopian, and simply dark. The cinematography in this season is astonishing. The dramatically unsymmetrical frames, the color compositions, and the musical choices are brilliant. Although there are some forgettable moments and slow-paced scenes, it's still a damn great season. This season has a lot of brilliant ideas, such as making a fake sitcom, sequences of weird events taking place, building suspense, creating a surprising climax without the camera moving a single inch. Sam Esmail really makes sure you get at least one bit of entertainment out of every single episode, and every episode is also quite different and distinct from each other. So this season is like an album. It's like a really creative musical album, and every single song is like an episode, and they are really different from each other. They are special in their own way, and I love it. It's just really entertaining. The flow is really nice too. Yeah, it's really confusing and entertaining at the same time. It makes you confront reality. It forces you to feel feelings that you never expected yourself to feel. And it's like an experience that you will never get from watching any other TV shows. So, Sam Esmail, a real underrated genius. The acting performances are also really good. Rami Malek and Christian Slater, Emmy-worthy performances. At last, the worst episode is Episode 1, Unmasked Part 1, and the best is Episode 10, Hidden Process. Wow. I'm saying Mr. Robot Season 2 is mind-blowing and mind-boggling and bending and twisting and all sorts of things. And I'm giving Mr. Robot Season 2 a 9 to a 9. Almost a 10, but a 9 out of 10. So, have you watched Mr. Robot Season 2? From 1 to 10, how much would you rate it? Like if you like and subscribe if you want more.